The rain fell in sheets so thick it turned the night into a blur of distorted lights and glistening pavement, but she didn't notice the weather anymore. Maddie Cole had trained herself to ignore discomfort, rain, cold, hunger, fatigue. All of it was irrelevant when you were seconds away from the kind of shot that made or ruined careers. Her breathing was slow and steady, her cheek pressed against the stock of a rifle that felt like an extension of her own body, the barrel fixed on a faint glimmer of movement more than a kilometer away. She had tracked that movement for hours, watching, waiting, adjusting for wind that whipped unpredictably through the mountain pass. Her spotter lay prone beside her, murmuring corrections through clenched teeth. Left point 2, wind's shifting. You don't have a clean line. They'll call it off if. Maddie cut him off with a glance sharp enough to silence him. She didn't need to hear that line again. Everyone had said it already. That shot can't be made. She'd heard it in the briefing room, from her commanding officer, from the unit sniper she'd replaced, even from the enemy analyst who likely thought they were safe tonight. But Maddie wasn't here because she took easy shots. She was here because she made the impossible ones look inevitable. Through the scope, her target's silhouette wavered in the mist, barely distinguishable from the shadows of the crumbling outpost. The man had been moving for hours, a ghost threading through the chaos of the war zone, and now he was finally still, sitting near a broken wall with 2 guards at his side. Maddie knew the man's name, Viktor Morozov. A mercenary leader whose ruthlessness had made him untouchable. His team had butchered civilians in 3 separate villages in the last month, leaving their bodies as warnings, messages written in blood that no one dared erase. Tonight, he was supposed to be safe, hidden deep in enemy territory, shielded by storms and distance. The brass had only authorized Maddie to attempt this shot because they had no other choice. A ground assault would mean dozens of dead soldiers. An airstrike was impossible with the weather grounding drones and planes alike. If Maddie couldn't pull this trigger and make history, the man would slip away, and more blood would follow. She exhaled slowly, watching the crosshairs tremble a fraction of an inch with every beat of her heart. She could feel the raw bite of cold through her gloves, could feel how the rainwater had seeped under her collar and traced icy fingers down her spine. Her body was screaming for her to move, to wipe her face, to flex her aching fingers, but she didn't. Every nerve in her body was tuned to the rhythm of her breathing, to the invisible math running through her head: wind speed, angle, elevation, air density, distance. She could hear her instructors' voices in her memory: trust the rifle, trust the shot. 1 squeeze, 1 kill. She adjusted her hold a millimeter, then another, recalibrating with the instinct of someone who had spent a decade living behind a scope. A burst of static crackled in her earpiece, followed by a voice she knew well. Captain Ramirez. Cole, we're at 0 hour. Command wants confirmation, are you taking it or not? Maddie's lips curved into the faintest smile. Ramirez wasn't asking because he doubted her, he was asking because he needed to cover himself if she failed. Nobody wanted to be the one to sign off on an impossible shot. She pressed her finger lightly on the trigger guard, stilling her breath, her gaze unblinking. Taking it, she whispered, her voice flat and steady. The line went dead. She imagined the entire command tent holding its breath as her finger drifted to the trigger. Time seemed to slow, the way it always did before she fired. She could hear her own pulse, steady and unhurried, despite the storm raging around her. She'd learned to make her mind a void in these moments, stripping away every distraction until there was only the shot. Her breathing slowed until her chest barely moved. The world through the scope narrowed and sharpened, every drop of rain catching light like shards of glass, every detail of the outpost burned into her mind. Victor shifted slightly, leaning forward to speak to one of his guards. Maddie adjusted by instinct, aligning the shot through a tiny gap between 2 broken walls. At this range, even the curvature of the earth had to be factored in. A shot like this wasn't just about marksmanship, it was about mastery over physics, patience, and nerves. Her spotter exhaled sharply beside her. Wind's dying down. It's now or never. Maddie didn't reply. She didn't need to. She'd already decided. Her finger tightened, so slow and controlled that it was impossible to tell the exact moment the shot broke. The rifle roared, the recoil slamming into her shoulder with familiar force, but she didn't flinch. Through the scope, she watched the round cut through the storm like a needle, a silent promise of death arcing across the night. The delay felt eternal. 1 second, 2, 3, then Victor's head jerked back violently, a crimson spray mixing with rain. His guards froze in shock, then scrambled for cover, but it was pointless. The man was dead before his body slumped to the ground. Maddie's breath left her in a slow, measured sigh. She'd done it. The impossible shot. For a moment, there was silence in her headset, A stunned pause as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Then Ramirez's voice came back, low and disbelieving. "Target down? Confirm?" Maddie's mouth twitched into a humorless smile. "Confirmed," she said. The silence that followed wasn't shock anymore, it was awe. She imagined the analysts back at command scrambling to replay footage, to calculate distance and wind factors, to figure out how she'd managed it. But Maddie wasn't thinking about them. She was already scanning the area through her scope, checking for enemy movement. Shots like this made you a hero for a day and a target forever. "Pack it up," she told her spotter, her voice steady. The adrenaline hadn't hit yet. It wouldn't, not until they were safe and clear. For now, she was all discipline and routine. The two of them moved quickly, breaking down the rifle, securing their gear, erasing signs of their position. Maddie's mind stayed sharp and cold, cataloging every sound in the storm, every flicker of movement in the distance. The enemy would be looking for them soon, and they were deep behind hostile lines. One shot could change a war, but it also painted a bullseye on your back. As they slipped through the mud and darkness, Maddie felt the weight of what she'd done settle in her chest. Not guilt, she'd made peace with her role a long time ago, but the heavy awareness that her life had just changed. This shot would be studied, dissected, turned into legend. People would call her a prodigy, a natural-born sniper, the woman who made an impossible kill from over a kilometer away in a storm that grounded aircraft. They'd tell the story, but they'd never understand the hours of stillness, the aching muscles, the burning focus, the cost of becoming that good. Maddie had just bought her team, and maybe the entire region, a chance at peace. And for that, she would take the weight. But as they reached their extraction point and the distant thrum of a helicopter grew louder, she knew this wasn't over. One impossible shot didn't end a war, it just started a new chapter. And in that chapter, Maddie Cole would be both hero and hunted. The helicopter blades tore through the rain-soaked night, the thrum reverberating in Maddie's bones as she crouched low in the mud, her rifle case slung over her shoulder. The rotor wash whipped the downpour into a frenzy, sheets of water hammering her helmet and goggles as she and her spotter sprinted toward the bird. Her boots sank into the muck with every step, but her pace never faltered. She grabbed the door frame with one gloved hand and hauled herself inside, collapsing into the vibrating metal belly of the chopper. Her spotter, Reyes, dove in behind her, signaling to the crew chief with two sharp gestures. The side gunner swung the M134 minigun out and scanned the dark ridge lines as the helicopter clawed its way upward into the storm. Maddie didn't bother to remove her gear. She sat rigid, rifle clutched across her lap, scanning the night through the open door, searching for muzzle flashes in the darkness. The comms crackled with voices layered over one another, command updates, extraction coordinates, weather warnings. Maddie caught fragments, contact North Ridge, hold fire, negative ID, storm front moving fast. The crew chief tapped her shoulder and motioned for her to strap in. She complied, snapping the harness across her chest and leaning back against the cold steel wall. Her heartbeat was steady, but she could feel her body vibrating from the adrenaline she'd suppressed while lying prone for hours. Now, with the target eliminated, her muscles trembled from the sudden release of tension. She flexed her fingers one by one, forcing circulation back into hands that felt like they'd been carved from ice. Reyes removed his headset and shot her a grin that barely masked his disbelief. "Cole, you're insane. You know that, right? I didn't even see the guy's head move in that scope. I thought," she cut him off with a raised hand, not out of irritation but instinct. Talking about the shot now felt wrong. It wasn't superstition. It was a sniper's discipline. You didn't celebrate kills in the field. You didn't gloat. You stayed sharp, because every successful hit came with a price. Maddie adjusted her headset, tuning back into the command frequency. "Eagle Team, this is Overwatch," Ramirez's voice came through, clipped but calm. "Clean kill confirmed. Command is green-lighting full withdrawal. Get her home, boys." Maddie leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes briefly, letting the sound of Ramirez's voice ground her. The storm outside roared, lightning flashing in jagged bursts across the horizon, illuminating the jagged mountains below. It was the kind of storm that made pilots earn their pay, and tonight, their survival. They weren't 10 minutes into their flight when the first tracer round streaked upward from the tree line below. Maddie snapped her eyes open as the crew chief yelled, "Incoming! Hang on!" The helicopter banked hard right, the gunner laying down suppressive fire. The staccato roar of the minigun filled the cabin, drowning out the thunder. Maddie grabbed the edge of the door frame and leaned out slightly, scanning for movement in the black forest below. The enemy had been ready. They must have spotted their position after the shot and mobilized fast. This was retaliation. Contact at 3 o'clock. RPG. Reyes yelled. Maddie saw the faint flash just as the helicopter jinked violently. The rocket-propelled grenade whooshed past them, exploding harmlessly in the distance. The pilot dove, skimming dangerously low over the tree line, using terrain to break line of sight. Maddie's mind worked fast. If they were engaging this aggressively, Victor's death had thrown the enemy into chaos. They weren't retreating. They were hunting. She signaled Reyes, and the two of them unstrapped, moving toward the open side of the helicopter, crouching low. Maddie pulled the scope off her rifle and used it like binoculars, scanning ahead for launches. Her instincts screamed they weren't clear yet. There, she barked, spotting movement on a ridge ahead, a pair of fighters kneeling with an RPG launcher. She dropped to a prone position on the floor of the chopper, bracing her rifle against the doorframe. Hold steady, she yelled to the pilot, who flattened their trajectory just long enough. Maddie exhaled and squeezed the trigger. Even over the roar of the engines, she felt the rifle's report, saw the first fighter drop. The second scrambled for cover, abandoning the launcher. Maddie didn't fire again. She didn't need to. The bird surged forward, skimming the treetops, banking left to escape the kill zone. Reyes gave a low whistle. You just saved us from becoming a crater. Again. Maddie ignored him, her gaze sweeping the horizon. The adrenaline had fully kicked in now, her senses sharpened to a razor's edge. She could feel the thrum of the helicopter through her bones, could smell the tang of gunpowder mixed with rain. Every fiber of her being was focused on survival. This wasn't over. It took another 20 minutes of evasive flying before the mountains fell away behind them, replaced by the sprawling darkness of friendly territory. The tension in the cabin didn't ease until the pilot called, crossing into green zone. ETA 5 minutes. Maddie finally allowed herself to sit back and lower her weapon. She glanced at Reyes, whose grin was gone now, replaced by something like awe. That was one for the books, he said quietly. Maddie didn't reply. She wasn't thinking about books or records. She was thinking about the ripple effect of what they'd just done. Viktor Morozov wasn't just a mercenary leader, he was the linchpin in a brutal network of warlords and arms dealers. Killing him would shatter alliances, ignite rivalries, and put a massive target on Maddie's head. When the helicopter touched down at the forward operating base, the landing pad was slick with rain and buzzing with activity. Medics, mechanics, and armed soldiers swarmed the bird as Maddie and Reyes disembarked. The storm had turned the ground into a river of mud, soaking their boots as they made their way toward the command tent. Maddie felt every eye on her. Word of the impossible shot had already spread. Soldiers paused to glance at her, whispers rippling through the crowd. She kept her gaze forward, expression unreadable. She wasn't here for fame. She was here to finish the mission. Inside the tent, Captain Ramirez was waiting, arms folded, jaw tight. His eyes softened slightly when they landed on Maddie. Hell of a shot, Cole, he said, voice low. You just rewrote doctrine tonight. Maddie shrugged, stripping off her soaked gloves. Targets down. That's all that matters. Ramirez studied her for a moment, then leaned closer. Command wants you debriefed ASAP. Intel's already moving to capitalize on the chaos. You've just started a storm bigger than this one. As she followed him deeper into the tent, Maddie's exhaustion hit her like a freight train. Her muscles ached, her body trembled from hours of stillness and adrenaline spikes, but her mind stayed sharp. She'd been in the game long enough to know this wasn't the end of the mission. Victor's death was a seismic event in the underworld of warfare, and seismic events always triggered aftershocks. Maddie was already anticipating them. Every rival of Victor's would want to know who made the shot, and every ally he had would want revenge. She sat down at a metal table, rainwater dripping from her gear, as a team of intelligence officers slid photos and maps in front of her. They were already moving pieces on the board, plotting strikes, interrogating captured comms traffic. Maddie scanned the images, her face expressionless, but inside her thoughts raced. She wasn't a strategist, she was a weapon. But even a weapon knew when it was about to be pointed at something bigger than anyone expected. The command tent smelled of damp canvas, gun oil, and wet earth. Generators outside hummed with a steady rhythm that underscored every conversation inside. Maddie sat at the cold metal table, stripped of her rifle but still armored in her tactical vest. Her face was lit by the harsh white glow of a portable lamp, her eyes scanning the photographs and intelligence reports spread out before her. Across the table, Major Sinclair, the senior intelligence officer at the forward base, tapped a pen against a satellite image of the compound where Viktor Morozov had been hiding. The chaos your shot caused is significant, Sinclair said, his voice calm but edged with calculation. We've intercepted comms from 3 rival factions already. They're moving against each other. Some are retreating. Others are mobilizing. You've destabilized their entire network. He looked up at Maddie, his sharp features betraying a trace of admiration. They didn't believe you could make that shot. Frankly, neither did I. Maddie ignored the compliment, her gaze fixed on a grainy satellite photo. The compound where Victor had been killed was swarming with fighters now, trucks pouring in from distant outposts. She traced their movements mentally, mapping the likely routes they would use. They'll come looking for me, she said evenly. Sinclair nodded. They already are. You've just become the most valuable and most hunted asset in this theater. He gestured toward the door, where Ramirez stood with arms crossed. Captain, tell her what we've got. Ramirez stepped forward, his face grim. Intercepted chatter suggests Victor's second-in-command is consolidating power. This guy calls himself Mikhail the Ghost. He's not as flamboyant as Victor. He's smarter. Deadlier. And he's got a vendetta now. Maddie leaned back in her chair, processing the information. She wasn't surprised. Every kill created a ripple, but this one was a tidal wave. Mikhail would see her as more than a threat, she was a symbol. Killing Victor was like slapping his entire network across the face. Mikhail wouldn't stop until he evened the score. So what's command's play? She asked, her voice low. Sinclair exchanged a glance with Ramirez. They want you out of here, Sinclair said. Pull you back to HQ, debrief you, and keep you safe. But I don't think that's the smart move. You've got eyes on this theater. You understand their terrain. Pulling you out now could cost us momentum. Ramirez spoke before she could respond. Sinclair's right. We've got one shot to use this chaos to our advantage. Victor's death has every merc and warlord in the region scrambling. If we move fast, we can dismantle their network. But you're the linchpin, Cole. You're the ghost they are chasing, and if we play this right, we can use that to lure Mikhail out. Maddie's expression hardened. She wasn't a chess piece. She was a sniper. But Ramirez knew her well enough to understand what she was thinking. I'm not asking you to walk into a trap blind, he said. I'm telling you we have a chance to end this warlord problem for good. You've already made the impossible shot. Now let's leverage it. The words sat heavy between them. Maddie knew the risks. Snipers operated in the shadows, unseen and unheard. Staying alive meant staying invisible. But now she was a legend overnight. Her face wouldn't be on posters, but her name was already whispered in enemy camps. She'd killed a man they thought untouchable. Legends drew attention, and attention was death in her line of work. Still, part of her, the part that had spent years training for perfection, that had taken the shot no one believed she could make, felt the weight of opportunity. Fine, she said finally. What's the plan? Sinclair leaned forward, spreading out more intel photos. We've pinpointed Mikhail's likely command post. He's holed up in an old mining facility 30 miles north of where you took the shot. He's not staying put. Our drones are still grounded because of this weather, but signals intel says he's consolidating his lieutenants. If we hit him now, we can cut the head off the snake completely. But, Sinclair paused, his gaze sharpening. We need you to take another shot. This one will be harder. Mikhail knows what happened to Victor. He's paranoid. We can't get ground forces close without walking into an ambush. You'd have to take the shot from an extreme angle, through terrain he thinks protects him. Maddie studied the images silently. The mining facility was a fortress, high walls, watchtowers, and multiple layers of cover. The approach was treacherous. She'd have to climb, crawl, and wait for hours, maybe days, to get a clean shot. And unlike Victor, Mikhail would expect her. It was a sniper's nightmare, hunting a target who was already hunting you. Still, Maddie didn't hesitate. I'll do it, she said, her tone flat. Sinclair raised an eyebrow. No questions? Maddie shook her head. You want him gone. I'll make it happen. Reyes, who had been silent in the corner, shifted uneasily. Cole, you realize what this means, right? We're not ghosts anymore. We're bait. They'll know it's you. Every trigger-happy merc in this region will be looking for us. Maddie glanced at him, her expression unreadable. They can look all they want. They won't see me until it's too late. That night, Maddie lay in her bunk, staring at the dim ceiling of the forward base barracks. She hadn't slept in over 30 hours, but exhaustion didn't come easily after a mission like today's. Her body ached from lying motionless for hours, but her mind was sharper than ever. She could still see Victor's head in her scope, still feel the exact moment the bullet left the chamber. That shot was burned into her memory, not because of pride, but because of precision. She'd executed it flawlessly, and she knew she would need that same focus for Mikhail. Her instincts told her this next mission would be different. More dangerous. More personal. Around her, soldiers moved quietly through the dim barracks, the low hum of whispered conversations filling the air. Maddie could feel their eyes on her. She'd become a myth in a single night, and myths always carried weight. Soldiers respected her, but they also feared what her presence meant. Where Maddie went, death followed, enemy or otherwise. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing slowly, letting her body sink into the thin mattress. She'd learned long ago to take rest whenever it came, even if her mind was still running at full speed. Hours later, before dawn, she was up again, her gear packed, rifle cleaned and assembled with surgical precision. Ramirez was waiting by the motor pool, his expression grim. "Weather's holding. We've got a window, but it won't last long." She climbed into the armored vehicle without a word. Reyes slid in beside her, looking more tired than she felt. The convoy rolled out, headlights off, engines low, disappearing into the misty wilderness. Maddie sat in silence, her rifle across her lap, her gloved hands resting on it like it was part of her. The world outside was a blur of fog and shadow, but she didn't need to see it. She could already picture the terrain, the angles, the kill zone. As they drove deeper into enemy territory, Maddie felt the familiar calm settle over her. This was where she belonged, not in briefing rooms, not in tents, but in the field, where the only thing that mattered was precision and patience. Somewhere out there, Mikhail was waiting, convinced he was safe behind his fortress walls. He was wrong. The convoy moved like a shadow through the misty wilderness, tires crunching softly on gravel roads slick with rain. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the only light came from the faint glow of instrument panels inside the armored vehicle. Maddie sat in silence, helmet tilted forward, her hands resting lightly on the rifle laid across her knees. Reyes sat opposite her, checking gear with mechanical precision. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was the kind of silence born of years in the field, a mutual understanding that every word carried weight. Their driver, a young corporal with steady hands, kept his eyes fixed on the road, navigating the narrow path through dense pine forests without headlights. The world outside was a maze of black silhouettes, tree branches heavy with rain, and fog that clung to the earth like smoke from an unseen fire. Maddie replayed the satellite images in her mind, the mining facility perched high on a rocky ridge, sheer cliffs on one side and dense woods on the other, with a winding dirt road snaking up to fortified gates. Mikhail had chosen his stronghold well. Even before Victor's assassination, he'd been known for paranoia, moving constantly, setting traps and counter-sniper measures everywhere he went. Now, with Victor dead, Mikhail was expecting the impossible. He knew someone out there had killed his boss with a shot that shouldn't have been possible. That made him dangerous, not just because he'd be heavily guarded, but because he'd be hunting Maddie just as hard as she hunted him. She could already feel the weight of his anticipation like a storm front pressing against her skin. The convoy stopped 3 kilometers from the drop zone, engines rumbling softly before cutting out completely. Ramirez appeared at the rear of the lead vehicle, his silhouette sharp against the mist. He crouched next to Maddie as she stepped out, her boots sinking into wet earth. "This is as far as we take you," he said, voice low but steady. "You and Reyes are on foot from here. Extraction point is 2 clicks west of the facility, near that creek bed we marked on the map. Weather's getting worse, so you'll have a 6-hour window at best before the next storm cell pins us down." Maddie nodded, adjusting the strap of her rifle case. She didn't need a pep talk, she needed to move. Ramirez seemed to sense that. "Watch your 6, he added simply, and then disappeared back into the fog. Maddie and Reyes moved quickly but quietly through the underbrush, their gear muffled, every step measured. The forest was alive with the sound of dripping rain and distant wind, branches swaying like skeletal fingers in the darkness. Maddie's senses were tuned to every rustle, every flicker of movement. She'd operated in countless hostile environments, but this one felt different. It wasn't just a mission, it was a duel, a hunter stalking another hunter. The realization sharpened her focus even further. Mikhail wasn't just hiding behind walls, he was setting a trap. That meant Maddie needed to be more than careful, she needed to be unpredictable. They reached the base of the ridge just as a pale gray light crept over the horizon, barely cutting through the fog. Maddie signaled for Reyes to halt, and they crouched behind a fallen log, scanning the slope above them. The incline was steep, littered with loose rocks and sparse vegetation. She could make out faint glimmers of movement near the top, guards patrolling the walls, their silhouettes distorted by mist. Maddie studied the terrain with a sniper's eye, already calculating lines of sight, angles, and potential firing positions. The obvious approach would be suicide. They'd expect her to find a vantage point on the facing ridge or one of the nearby clearings. Instead, she planned to climb. The angle was brutal, but if she could get directly above them, she'd have a shot no one would anticipate. Not going for the ridge. Reyes whispered, reading her body language. Maddie shook her head. They'll have it glassed over. We go high. Reyes sighed softly but didn't argue. He'd been with her long enough to trust her instincts. They began their ascent, moving slowly to avoid dislodging rocks that would give them away. Every muscle in Maddie's body strained as she climbed, the rifle case on her back feeling heavier with each meter. Rain slicked the rocks, turning the climb into a dangerous crawl, but Maddie was relentless. She'd trained for this, hours spent on obstacle courses and cliff faces, conditioning her body to remain steady under extreme strain. Her fingers found holds in the jagged stone, her boots wedged into crevices, her breath controlled and silent. By the time they reached the narrow ledge near the top, her arms burned, and sweat mixed with rain on her face, but she ignored it. She lay flat, pulling the rifle from its case with the reverence of a surgeon preparing an instrument. Reyes crawled up beside her, setting up the spotting scope. They were invisible from below, concealed by the overhang of rock and a veil of fog, but Maddie knew invisibility was temporary. Mikhail's men were watching every approach. They just weren't looking straight up. Yet. She unfolded the bipod and extended the stock, her movements precise and methodical despite the cold biting at her fingers. The rifle's weight was comforting, familiar. Through the scope, she scanned the compound below. The guards were alert, rifles at the ready, eyes sweeping the tree line. Searchlights cut arcs through the mist, illuminating trucks and supply crates. She spotted 2 machine gun nests, one near the main gate and another on a rooftop. Her crosshairs drifted over them, then over a cluster of armed men gathered near a steel door at the base of a tower. Maddie's gut told her Mikhail was in that tower. See him? Reyes murmured, adjusting the spotting scope. Maddie shook her head slightly. Not yet. He'll show himself. He has to. They settled in, lying motionless on the cold stone, rain dripping off the brim of Maddie's helmet. Time stretched. Minutes passed like hours. Maddie's body ached, but her mind was razor-sharp. Patience was a sniper's greatest weapon, and she wielded it like a blade. She slowed her breathing until it was imperceptible, every muscle relaxed despite the tension coiling inside her. Through the scope, she scanned for patterns, for any sign of leadership. Guards moved in predictable routes, vehicles came and went, but one figure stood out, a man who appeared briefly at the tower door, barking orders. His body language was different. He wasn't afraid. Maddie locked onto him, memorizing his posture, the way others deferred to him. That had to be Mikhail. As if sensing her gaze, the man disappeared back into the tower, and Maddie felt a flicker of anticipation. Got him, she whispered. Reyes leaned closer. Distance. She adjusted her scope, calculating quickly. 900 meters. Angle correction, 2 degrees. Wind steady at 4 knots east. Reyes scribbled the numbers, but they both knew she was already computing. Everything instinctively. He's paranoid, she murmured. He'll move again. Wait for the window. They waited. The fog thickened, rolling across the compound in ghostly waves. Guards grew restless, radios crackling as they tightened patrols. Maddie barely moved, her heartbeat slow and steady. The tension was suffocating, but it was also familiar. She thrived in these moments, when the entire world narrowed to the size of a crosshair. She thought about Victor, about the disbelief in command when she confirmed the kill. Now she was about to attempt something even more audacious. And then it happened. The tower door opened, and Mikhail stepped into view, flanked by 2 guards. He didn't look like a man in hiding. He looked like a man daring someone to try. Maddie's finger found the trigger, her breathing slow and steady. This was the duel she'd anticipated. Somewhere in that fortress, Mikhail had a sniper of his own, watching the perimeter, waiting for her. She had seconds to make the shot before they realized where she was. Her world shrank to the reticle, the gentle squeeze of her trigger finger, and the stillness of a predator ready to strike. The world fell silent in Maddie's mind as her crosshairs settled on Mikhail's head. The rain, the wind, even the distant rumble of thunder, all of it faded. Her breathing slowed to nothing, her heartbeat a steady metronome guiding her trigger squeeze. She'd lined up shots like this 1,000 times in training, but this wasn't a range, and this wasn't Victor. Mikhail was a predator, and predators rarely exposed themselves without reason. Maddie's instincts screamed that this was bait, but she didn't hesitate. She'd learned long ago that hesitation killed faster than bullets. She exhaled, and the rifle roared. The supersonic round cut through the mist, but Mikhail moved at the last second. The bullet grazed his shoulder instead of striking his head, spinning him backward. The guards shouted, dragging him inside. Maddie's curse was silent, internal, but her body was already moving. She rolled to the side, pulling Reyes with her just as a shot cracked against the rock where her head had been. Sparks flew, and the sharp ping of a high-caliber round echoed across the ridge. Maddie didn't need to be told, Mikhail's sniper had her position. "Move," she barked. Reyes grabbed the spotting scope, and they slid along the ledge, keeping low. Another shot rang out, rock chips exploding inches from Maddie's arm. The enemy sniper was good, fast, and clearly knew this terrain. Maddie could feel him tracking her. She ducked behind a jagged boulder, pressing her back against the cold stone. Her breathing remained calm, controlled, but her mind was running calculations at lightning speed. "He's got elevation on us," she murmured, scanning the tree line through her peripheral vision. Reyes swore softly. "You think he's on that west ridge?" Maddie nodded slightly. "That's where I'd be." Another shot slammed into the boulder, the force vibrating through her spine. Maddie slid onto her stomach, pulling her rifle around as Reyes crawled to a better angle with the scope. "Find him," she whispered. Reyes was silent for several seconds, scanning the misty ridges. Finally, he hissed, "Got him. 200 meters west, camouflaged in a nest under that pine cluster. Elevations higher than ours. He's good." Maddie's lips curved into the faintest ghost of a smile. "Not good enough." She adjusted her scope, zeroing in on the faint glint of glass peeking through the pine needles. Her rival sniper was nearly invisible, his ghillie suit blending perfectly with the environment, his barrel barely distinguishable from the branches. It was a duel now, one shot, one chance. Maddie slowed her breathing, calming every muscle in her body. She imagined herself melting into the stone beneath her, becoming part of the terrain. The enemy sniper fired again, the bullet striking so close she felt the heat of rock shards graze her cheek. He was good, but he'd made a mistake. The flash of his shot gave her a fraction of a second to confirm his exact position. "Hold," she murmured to Reyes. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and the rifle cracked like thunder. The shot slammed into the sniper's nest, and she watched through the scope as his body jerked, his rifle tumbling from his hands. A second later, the forest swallowed him, his form slumping into the needles. Maddie exhaled slowly, her body loosening from its coiled state. Reyes let out a sharp breath. "Holy, he almost had us," he whispered. Maddie's reply was calm, almost detached. "Almost doesn't count." She shifted focus immediately, scanning the compound below. Chaos had erupted. Guards were shouting, searchlights sweeping wildly across the tree line. Mikhail had been wounded, and his men were reacting with predictable aggression. Trucks roared to life, engines revving as fighters scrambled to lock down the perimeter. Maddie's failed headshot meant she'd lost her element of surprise, but not the advantage. Wounding Mikhail would throw him off balance, make him desperate. She just had to stay ahead of his paranoia. "We move," she said. Reyes looked at her incredulously. "Move? You want to reposition now? They'll have this whole ridge zeroed in." Maddie slung her rifle, her expression unreadable. "Exactly. Which means they won't expect us somewhere else this fast." She scanned the terrain behind them, already plotting a route. The mountain was treacherous, but Maddie thrived in environments where others faltered. Reyes followed, muttering under his breath but trusting her judgment. They descended the ledge, slipping silently between slick rocks and rain-slick roots. Maddie moved like a phantom, every step deliberate, every motion controlled. She'd been trained to vanish in hostile terrain, to become just another shadow in the mist. Reyes was good, too, his movements precise, but Maddie was operating on instinct now, every nerve tuned to the hunt. She knew Mikhail was rattled. A wounded predator was dangerous, but predictable. He'd bunker down, tighten security, and rely on his men to flush her out. That gave her a window, a narrow one, but enough for a second attempt. An hour later, they found a new position on a sheer cliff opposite the compound, hidden behind an outcropping of jagged stone. Maddie lay prone, adjusting her rifle, her breathing calm despite the ache in her arms and legs. Reyes set up the scope, scanning the compound. "They're spooked," he murmured. I see heavy movement near the tower. Searchlights everywhere. If you miss again, he didn't finish the sentence. Maddie didn't need him to. She knew the stakes. A second failure meant no third chance. She peered through her scope, watching the compound with Predator's patience. Mikhail would have to move eventually. He'd either try to escape or relocate deeper into the facility. Maddie was betting on escape. Men like him didn't trust walls, they trusted their own instincts. And his instincts would tell him this fortress wasn't safe anymore. Hours passed as the storm raged around them, lightning illuminating the compound in brief, ghostly flashes. Maddie ignored the cold seeping into her bones. She was a machine now, eyes fixed on the tower door. Finally, movement. A convoy of vehicles pulled up near the tower, headlights dimmed, men rushing to load crates and equipment. Reyes murmured softly, "Looks like he's packing up." Maddie adjusted her aim, following the flow of guards. Then she saw him. Mikhail, moving quickly despite the sling on his injured shoulder, barking orders, his head jerking in every direction as he scanned for threats. He was wearing body armor, but Maddie didn't need a headshot this time. A chest hit would drop him. She steadied her breathing, adjusted for wind, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked, and the shot cut through the storm. Mikhail staggered, clutching his side, but he didn't fall. He was wearing reinforced ceramic plates. Maddie cursed silently, chambering another round, but before she could fire again, guards swarmed him, dragging him toward one of the vehicles. Reyes swore. "They're getting him out." Maddie's jaw tightened. She fired again, taking out a guard, but the convoy roared to life, tires kicking up mud. "Move!" Maddie barked. She and Reyes packed their gear with lightning speed, vanishing into the mist as searchlights swept their direction. Bullets cracked through the night, striking rocks and trees as they sprinted through the forest. The hunt had flipped, now they were the prey. Maddie kept low, her rifle slung, her instincts guiding her through the chaos. She could hear engines revving, men shouting, dogs barking in the distance. Mikhail was alive, wounded, but alive. And now, he knew exactly who was hunting him. They didn't stop running until they were deep in the forest, the roar of vehicles fading behind them. Maddie pressed her back against a tree, chest rising and falling steadily, eyes scanning the darkness. Reyes crouched nearby, his face pale but determined. "We missed our shot," he said, voice low. Maddie shook her head. "We rattled him. He won't sleep tonight. Neither will we." The rain had slowed to a drizzle by dawn, but the forest still smelled of wet pine and gunpowder. Maddie crouched under the low branches of a cedar, wiping condensation from her scope. Her breath fogged in the cold air, every inhale sharp in her lungs. They'd been moving all night, keeping ahead of the search teams, but she knew it wouldn't last. Mikhail wasn't just a target anymore, he was a wounded apex predator, and predators hunted hardest when bleeding. Reyes crouched beside her, chewing on an energy bar like it was his last meal. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but exhaustion. "We should double back," he muttered, his voice barely above the whisper of wind through the trees. "His running scared. He'll hole up and wait this out. We get a day's rest, resupply, then take another shot." Maddie didn't answer immediately. She watched a crow circle overhead, its cry sharp in the silence, before speaking. "No," she said finally. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were hard. "He won't hole up. He's angry. He'll come for us." Reyes gave a humorless laugh. "He doesn't even know where we are." Maddie's gaze swept the tree line. "He will. Men like him don't wait. They make you think you're safe, then they take everything you love and burn it down." Her jaw tightened. "We move. We get to high ground, set a trap, and finish this before he finishes us." They moved through the forest like shadows, Maddie leading with silent precision. The mountain terrain was unforgiving, slick slopes, jagged rocks, and streams swollen from the storm, but Maddie thrived in conditions like these. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. Reyes followed, scanning their rear. He'd stopped doubting her instincts after the sniper duel. Maddie had a predator's mind, one that could anticipate danger before it even arrived. By mid-morning, they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow ravine. Maddie dropped to a crouch, scanning the terrain below. The ravine was a natural choke point, a place where even trained fighters would struggle to advance without exposing themselves. She set down her pack and pulled out her rifle, checking her ammo. Reyes raised an eyebrow. "You planning on waiting here?" Maddie shook her head. "We'll make them come to us." She pointed to the slope opposite the ravine. "You'll stay up there, cover me from elevation. I'll draw them in, take the first shots, force them to commit. Once they are pinned, we end it. Reyes hesitated. You're using yourself as bait. Maddie glanced at him, her expression unreadable. I've done it before. He wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew better. Maddie wasn't reckless, she was precise. If she said she'd done this before, it meant she'd already played this game and won. Reyes swallowed his unease and nodded. Fine. Let's set it up. They spent hours rigging the terrain. Maddie set motion sensors near the tree line and scattered sound traps along the ravine. They found a perfect sniper's nest for Reyes, a cluster of rocks that gave him a clear view of the approach. Maddie, meanwhile, found a shallow depression among the rocks where she could lie prone, nearly invisible. The setup was textbook, but she knew Mikhail wouldn't be easy prey. If he was coming, he'd bring his best men, and they'd be expecting an ambush. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, a heavy stillness settled over the forest. Maddie lay on her stomach, her rifle steady, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. The world narrowed to her breathing and the quiet hum of insects in the grass. She'd learned long ago that patience killed faster than bullets. Rhea's voice crackled softly in her earpiece. Nothing yet. You sure he's coming? Maddie didn't reply. She was listening. A faint rustle of branches. The crunch of boots on wet earth. Then silence. Maddie's lips curved into the faintest smile. He's here, she whispered. She spotted the first man moving through the tree line, his body wrapped in camouflage, rifle at the ready. He moved like a professional, slow, deliberate, scanning every angle. Two more shadows followed, their positions spread out in a hunter's formation. Maddie's heart rate slowed, her world shrinking to the crosshairs. She let them come closer, closer still, until the first man was almost within range of her trap. She squeezed the trigger, and the rifle thundered. The first man dropped instantly, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. The second dove for cover, barking into his radio, while the third fired wildly into the rocks. Maddie fired again, catching him in the leg, sending him tumbling. Contact front, she whispered into her mic. Rhea's rifle cracked from above, dropping another fighter trying to flank her position. Chaos erupted in the ravine. But Maddie's instincts screamed a warning. This was too easy. These weren't Mikhail's elite, they were bait. Her gut clenched, and she rolled just as a grenade arced over the ridge, exploding where she'd been lying. The shockwave slammed her against the rocks, her ears ringing. They're flanking. Reyes shouted in her earpiece. Maddie scrambled for cover, bullets slicing through the air around her. A shadow moved in the mist ahead, too fast, too precise. Maddie's breath caught in her throat. She knew that movement. Mikhail. He appeared like a ghost, crouched low, rifle raised. His eyes locked on hers through the storm of gunfire, and Maddie felt a rare flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, danger. Real danger. Mikhail fired, and she dove, the bullet grazing her shoulder. Pain flared hot, but she ignored it, rolling behind a rock and returning fire. Their shots cracked like thunder, each one measured, deadly. Reyes tried to cover her, but Mikhail's men had pinned him down, gunfire hammering his position. Maddie was alone now, one-on-one with a man who'd built his empire on blood. She shifted positions, crawling through the mud, her rifle steady despite the